Hello and welcome to Global Sources Live. My name is Tom and I am as delighted as ever to be your host, this time for a Buyer Fireside Chat. Today's topic is Quality Control Best Practices 2023. Of course, there are some best practices and top tips in the QC arena that are hardly perennials, that don't change from one year to the next, but the landscape does change, and sometimes there are things that you need to know that are brand new. And to that end, we have an expert guest to talk to today about all the issues related to recent changes in the sourcing landscape and some of those that are coming up in the near future. That expert guest is Renaud Anjoran of Southeast, and we will be talking to him in just a moment. But first, as ever, I should remind you that you can and should subscribe to Global Sources social media feeds and click the little bell icon or similar remind me icon wherever you're watching this so that you get alerts and notifications about our upcoming video and live stream content. Okay, and of course you can leave your comments in the video commenting area below this screen as well if you would like to do that. Actually, that's all the intro I have for today, so let's get right on with it and say hello to Renaud Anjoran. Let's see if we can get him on screen. Hi, Renaud.
Hey.
How's it going? How are you doing today?
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me on, and this is an interesting topic.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming on. You were my first choice when we had this topic on the list, and I'm glad that you said yes. So actually, before we dive into maybe the topic, could you give us a little bit of let's say a bit of background about yourself and your experience in this arena, so that our viewers know where you're coming from, so to speak.
Sure. So I've been in Hong Kong and China for 17 years now, including more than 10 years in Shenzhen, working in manufacturing quality, new product development, more on the reliability and quality side, mainly for buyers that have their manufacturing in China, Vietnam, India, and mostly in consumer goods, from consumer electronics to apparel to a range of different types of hard goods. And we've been paying a lot of attention to what happens, because our clients always have a lot of questions. And that's exactly the kinds of topics that you were asking me before the call. So that should be an interesting one, because there's a lot of things going on.
Yeah, and well, on that topic, what are some of the kind of the broad trends that are active right now? Maybe things that have happened over the last year or last few months or so, and that people are dealing with right now in, well, I guess across verticals or in some specific verticals, if you want to address that too.
Yeah, I want to touch on three big things, and the first one is, well, we're very involved in China. We're very invested in China, a number of facilities there and a lot of operations. And then our clients have become more and more, let's say, nervous about working with China. So they keep bringing it up in our calls with them, right? So when there were the Trump tariffs, they came up, and then people started to ask some questions, and then the U.S. Congress keeps getting harsher and harsher on China, and so on and so forth. And since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it's really going up one or two notches. And whenever we talk with clients, especially from, let's say, Commonwealth countries, including USA, let's say, they all worried that the market access to the US and the UK and Australia and so on might really get much harder for made in China products. And clients, those types of clients, they bring it up in maybe 30% or 40% of the calls. They have these worries and they want to hear, and it's really right there in their mind, right? And they always sort of trying to find ways to reduce their risk. Their investors ask them a lot of questions. Some of their big customers ask them a lot of questions. Why is it made in China? Are you not afraid of this or that? Do you have a plan, in case some contingencies happen? So this is a big one. There's a lot of people trying, but apart from the very big companies that have the means and can relocate manufacturing to a lot of possible countries, let's say SMEs have found it hard. Now it's really very different from industry to industry, right? In garment, textile products, it's been like that for a long time already, right? They moved to whatever, Vietnam, Bangladesh, and so on. But for example, in electronics, it's quite difficult if you're used to the China price and the China components. How do you get? Maybe you move assembly out of China, but it's very hard to move everything out of China. So that's a first big topic. The second one, which is related, is that, of course, when people want to move away from China, they try to put their manufacturing in some other countries. And there's been a lot of talk about Vietnam, and Vietnam got very, very full, right? Especially around Ho Chi Minh City and in the north around Hanoi. And what happens is that whether it's apparel, you still have a lot of fabrics and accessories coming from China. Whether it's electronics, they still have oftentimes most of the electronic components, or all of the electronic components, maybe already kitted in China and sent by truck. And it's not that far away, especially if it's North Vietnam. And in some other country, verticals, some other kinds of products, they will have the, I don't know, if it's eyewear, the frames, then they will have the acetate sheets sent from China and so on. So it's China plus one on the surface, but very often they still rely on China. There's also a big trend. I'd like to share the screen because it would be nicer maybe for the audience to see some of that. Let me go straight to this one. So this is this comes out of a research project by Professor O'Connor, who's now in Monash University, was in Hong Kong for a long time. And for example, in India, he found a number of public disclosures, public announcements from companies that they were moving things. And this is from 6 months ago. Actually, it has very clearly accelerated, but already Apple had been growing its a lot of its sourcing share from India, from big Taiwanese contract manufacturers, right? Everybody knows about Foxconn, but also Wistron, Pegatron, and so on. And there's a number of other companies here. Now it's very heavily weighted on electronics, but there's also a number of automotive components and some other products. Now this is again often driven by very big companies. So they move first, and then the supply chain sort of comes up as the assembly moves to these countries, and of course they try to foster a local network of suppliers, making the casing first, and the silicon part, and this and that, and then making some of the more let's say simple electronic components, and then moving up the value chain. This is what we think will happen, especially in a country like India that has a relatively large internal market and a lot of resources on site. So that's a big trend that has really become quite clear, we believe, this year, right? And then the third big topic, I think you have some specific questions around that, right? Is around the new regulations.
That's right. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, it's a lot of things coming up from the EU, but also some from the US. So do you want to go into that?
Yeah, I'd be interested to. Although it's just to you mentioned of India there does make me a bit curious. As you alluded to, Vietnam was sort of to a degree digging its way out of a bit of an infrastructure overload that it experienced. I guess. I guess it was happening shortly before the pandemic era, and then still a little bit now. Where, as you said, kind of there was a big boom in take up of supply, factory, especially in apparel from both North and South Vietnam, and then they kind of found they were a bit stuck for capacity in simply in transporting things by road and sea, as well as having the factory space and the people to make things in the factories, that weren't relocating from other cities. Do you foresee, obviously India's a lot bigger, has a lot more ports. Do you foresee something like that happening in particular regions of India, maybe, where things might get a bit over concentrated?
That's a good question. So yes, Vietnam is getting very full. The main constraint is really the factory capacity, as you mentioned, and the local supply of the usual components, and that's why it still comes in large part from China, and then they just key things together or do final assembly. In India, we are still far from that. Most of the electronics that I mentioned here is in South India, right, in the states of Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, so around Chennai, around Bangalore. That's where most of the electronics are going. Apparel is as always much more spread out. Hard goods and so on are much more spread out. Metalworks and so on are very spread out. So it's I don't see that coming up anytime soon. The Indian population is still very young, and the wages are much lower, and I mean there's so much resources there. On the human side, I'm not too worried about that, but the problem is more about the capacity of export ready manufacturing units. It is growing a lot with these big contract manufacturers, but they don't take on a lot of customers. They get one big customer, they're very, very full, and they can barely ramp up. Actually, is their main problem. They can hire and house the people nicely according to the law and everything, as fast as they would like. That's an Indian challenge. That is not a Chinese challenge, for example.
Very interesting. All right, thank you. But yes, let's get back onto that sort of regulatory track.
Okay.
And yeah, so I know there are new regulations either already enacted or in the process of happening, particularly in those major markets in the EU, USA, and so on. What are the need to knows on those things that are already affecting sourcing?
Okay. So the big overarching topic, I think, is that importers will have to know more about their supply chain, and will have to document more what they actually check. Okay, so let's go over some of these regulations that people need to be aware of. So if you set into the US, you've probably already heard of the UFLPA. Bit of a mouthful, but basically they don't want to allow market access to products made from materials somewhere in the supply chain, anywhere in the supply chain, that have been made with forced labor, or really in a certain western area of China where they suspect there's a lot of forced labor. Okay, so it's been hitting some, for example, cotton textile products. It's also hitting a lot of solar panels. So in the USA, they're starting to be very strict on this. U.S. Customs and Border Protection has stopped a lot of containers with solar panels. Okay, so this is not a regulation driven for environmental protection, obviously, because solar panels would be good. It's really purely on social compliance. That's the one regulation that really shows its teeth, and people need to really collect evidence, independently gathered evidence, not just given by the supplier, about where the critical components, such as polysilicon, for example, for solar panels, where they are made, where they are sourced from, right? So that's one in the US. So I'm just going to keep going. I have a few about the EU. So in the EU, people need to be aware of a certain trend. Really, they're raising the bar. So if you don't touch medical devices, you might not have heard about the EU medical device regulation, but it really raised the bar quite a lot compared to the previous one. That was actually just a directive. So I'm not going to go into the details, but it really raised the bar in all respects, including the obligation to declare the product and input it into a European database, so that it's much easier for customs and market surveillance authorities to check what is actually arriving, is it compliant, etc. Another one that's coming up this year is EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility. So if you sell products in the EU, you have to pay a company that will help do the recycling, okay, in advance as you put the products on the market. Because after that, you might say, well, I don't know what happens. I don't know. But no, these products, they would arrive, to end of life, and somebody will have to take care of them. So, and it might actually cost money, more money that can justify doing it. So they have to pay for it. It's still a bit different from country to country. I'm not going to go into the details, but it forces people to actually think of their supply chain downstream when they put the products on the market and after. Okay, and another one also in the EU is for companies that buy and that sell on the EU market some products that are in contact with food and beverage. Okay, so when there is recycled plastic and that material will be in contact with food or beverage, they actually require that the manufacturing process is documented. Okay, so that it's not just dumped together, not really cleaned, to make it simple, and just molded into finished products and let's send it to the market. They want to make sure, for food safety reasons mostly, that it's done in a certain way. So all of this is really pushing importers to do a bit more work and to declare more to the authorities and to gather more information. Okay, and some of this was gathered from the updates from Compliance Gate. For your information, I'm not a compliance expert myself, but I keep an eye on what's going on. Let's keep going on this topic. In the EU also, so I already touched on the solar panels and cotton and everything from Western China. The EU is also going to get hard on this. They are working on it. Okay, so there's already some laws, like for example in Germany, in the UK, something in France. Okay, they are going to come up with a European-wide requirement. So that also means you need to make sure you do your due diligence and you know where the products are made and where the, let's say, sensitive materials and components are made, because it's always going to be more suspect to purchase, I don't know, some textile products made from cotton. Okay, where does the cotton, where is it harvested, where is it processed, etc., rather than another type of product that doesn't have such, let's say, sensitive materials. Okay, so it's very important to start documenting this. Okay, another one is the EU is also working on a directive about reporting. Okay, now this is for listed companies, and it's going to come into place starting in 2024, I believe, and it's going to be spread out so smaller companies can do it later. But here, what they're trying to do is to use investors' pressure on companies, okay, from the investor side, from the capital side, let's say, put pressure on them so that they become more virtuous, let's say, in terms of environmental management. Okay, where do they get their materials? Is it highly polluting? How do they organize maybe end of life recycling? There's a lot of things that come into that. Okay, I'm not going into it, but it's a very wide topic. Social compliance, that's the S, and governance. So it's going to force companies to do it in a structured way and in a consistent way, so that it's actually going to be possible sort of to compare different companies. While right now companies are coming up with all kinds of claims and there's a lot of greenwashing, and here they really want to get rid of that. Okay, so that means more structured analysis and reporting and more focus on gathering data, okay, and backing the claims by data, and as much as possible getting data collected independently also. That's going to be a big one. And then eco-design. So again, any company putting products on the EU market need to be aware of that. So while the previous one, the reporting directive, was really about getting the information to the investors, so they put pressure on companies, this one is going to give information to consumers. So there's going to be something it's not very, very clear yet, but what they call a digital passport on every product, so people can see, and also the market authority, market surveillance authorities, and so on can also check very easily with that. And they're going to really raise the bar for textile products, for construction materials, probably also, it seems, lithium batteries. Okay, they have certain types of products in mind, and they're really going to pass some very specific requirements for these kinds of products, right? So, for example, fast fashion is a big problem. Garments that get made, dyed, is very polluting, and then they get discarded after being worn like 3 or 5 times. They don't want that. For example, they want to avoid it, and maybe one way might be some extra tax or things like that, right? So this is a big one if you sell in the EU. And I'm not going to read through all that, but it will put an emphasis on durability, reusability, upgradability, repairability, no hazardous dangerous chemicals, less energy and resource consumption, right? So this is very important. So digitization of product information, as I mentioned, even consumers will have access to some information here. So these are the objectives of this eco-design for sustainable product regulation. Again, it's a regulation, so no joking around. It's going to be low in all the EU countries right away. And again, I'm not going to go into this, but basically you need to have an idea about your supply chain, to have sort of at least a rudimentary map about it, have an idea what is made where, what is the bill of materials. You can't really buy a product and just distribute it without knowing anything about the product, right? And then really eco-design, right? So there's a focus on designing products to make them a little bit more sustainable, right? And they're going to put more and more pressure on that. And as I mentioned, apparel and textile, lithium-ion batteries, construction materials, probably consumer electronics will be down the road. Also will be targeted here, and electronic waste and so on and so forth. So.
Right. Oh yeah, sorry, I was just going to jump in and say I think that the eco-design is interesting in that it's sort of a lot of these regulatory things are kind of compliance issues, but that emphasis on durability and materials kind of brings it more back into the realm of QCing your factory output, well, inputs and outputs, I guess, as well. And that right there on the slide, I guess, is the question: what do we? This seems like a lot for anybody who's sourcing products from anywhere, and even if it's not destined for the US or the EU, where we have these regulations coming in, there is still that kind of consumer-driven side in many markets around the world for more durability, a kind of greener, more sustainably produced product. That if you want to sell to those consumers, you need to have your papers in order, so to speak. So how do we get there from here? What are some first steps that viewers can be taking tomorrow when they try and address these issues? Right.
Yeah, basically you need to think, okay, if you source, for example, from China or Vietnam or India, okay, you need to start gathering some information about your supply chain. Okay, ask some questions to your suppliers, such as, what are the main components and materials coming into the products? Where are they coming from? At least what city and country? If I purchase 10,000 units of the finished product, how many kilos of the different kinds of materials do you purchase? Because at one point you might have to provide that information for a life cycle assessment or something similar. If they don't want to give you that kind of information, or if they say, I don't know, okay, you might be working with suppliers that will bring you trouble. Okay, so I would say first, the easiest way is when you're sourcing new suppliers, you need to include some of these sort of checkpoints, let's say, in your supplier qualification process. And if you see that they don't want to give you this kind of information, well, that's a bit of an issue. You know you will run into trouble. So try to pick new suppliers that give you that information. That's, I would say, the easiest path. But then for the current suppliers, you need to see, okay, you need to have a plan. Okay, they don't give me any information. They don't want to help me on that. Especially if you are distributing their products and you don't even know the bill of material, you don't know anything about the product. Well, that is an issue. You're not the design authority, but the design authority is giving you zero information. You're going to be in trouble with these upcoming regulations. Okay, I talked a lot about the EU because the EU is sort of leading the way, but with all the talk these days about doing something against climate change and loss of biodiversity and so on, Australia and Canada have their own programs. The US is probably going to follow. If it's not the US, maybe it would just be California, New York State, and so on. So we forecast that in the next 5 years there will be more and more of these regulations. And really, you need to know about your supply chain. You need to gather data, and you need to evaluate. Again, ESG, right? Focus on environmental and social compliance at least. Have an idea about environmental impact of your product, full life cycle, including the energy the users will consume and whatever issues will happen during use and after use. Can some of it be recycled, and so on and so forth. And social compliance, you need to have an idea also, at least where things are made, any potential allegations of forced labor based on that. These are, broad brush. This is where things are going. I cannot be very, very specific because not all these regulations are already confirmed. Let's say they are confirmed, but the final draft is sometimes not known yet, right? But that's the direction we are going into.
Yeah, so you've got to kind of stay tuned to the developments in whatever vertical you're in, I suppose. So, well, Renaud, thank you very much. That was wonderfully informative. If any of our viewers would like to get some help from you and your inspection expertise, where should they go looking for you or contact you?
They can simply go to sofis.com. You have the company name here, or they can search for my name in Global Sources.
Yeah, that will do the trick. Speaking of Global Sources, I'd also like to throw in a plug for, we did have a series of, I want to say 5 or 6 linked articles about ESG a few months back by the journalist Rex Aguado, which he wrote for us, which was a very good exclusive. So go look on globalsources.com for them. I think they're pretty informative, and although actually I hear more about what to expect and how to start looking for the specifics than really that specific, because it's always everything's in flux until it isn't. Yeah, that's worth, as I said at the beginning, do always follow and look out for upcoming content from Global Sources Live. We'll have some more stuff for you in the new year. But until then, thank you for Renaud so much for your time and your insights.
Thanks a lot, Tom, and thanks to Global Sources.
Yeah, thank you. And until next time, please, goodbye.
Bye.